Good afternoon, everybody. I am just going to wait a moment or two and just let the attendees drop in. As I see the numbers going up still here, I'm just going to wait a moment. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everybody on the East Coast. Good morning, everybody on the West Coast. This is Sharon Hewson at AEE. Welcome to our AEE member webinar for Thursday, June 20th. Just a couple of things before we go ahead and get started with our introductions. As always, you will receive a follow-up email in the coming days, those of you that are attending the live session today, and you will receive a link to the recording of today's presentation and a link to your certificate of attendance. So please look out for that in the coming days. At the Q&A today, so if you have questions, there is a questions box for you to type those questions in. Please feel free to do that throughout the webinar as it's going on. The plan is to address the Q&A at the end unless something urgent comes up, and just please make sure as you go through you put those in there so they're all ready towards the end. If you do have questions regarding any technical issues, can you please post those in the chat section, not the questions section, and I will communicate with you one-on-one to try and help you troubleshoot. We do actually have a handout for you today. You guys often ask for copies of the presentations. If you take a look in the handout section, you will see right there we have a copy of today's presentation in PDF format for you. You may go ahead and download that at any time during the presentation. Please feel free to do that. And our presenter today, Miss Jennifer Fortenberry, will share with you her contact information for you to follow up if you need to. So moving on, for today, your webinar topic is Best-in-Class Corporate Energy Management Programs. This is going to be presented by Jennifer Fortenberry. Now, Jennifer is the East Region Energy Director with Jones Lang LaSalle's Energy Services Group. Jennifer is responsible for service delivery in the region and assisting the portfolio energy managers in executing energy management and sustainability programs for various clients to help reduce energy and water usage and cost. The programs that Jennifer works with include the energy procurement and alternative energy evaluations, benchmarking and goal setting, identification of energy savings opportunities, investigation into new technologies, as well as the coordination of demand-side management projects and sustainability initiatives for client portfolios. Jennifer also oversees JLL's energy audit and retro commissioning services for the Americas and the utility rebate management service UtiliCapture. Jennifer has held a variety of previous employment, including being an energy engineer and a project manager at Facility Services Group, a national strategic energy engineering and consulting firm. And Jennifer has served as the lead commissioning authority to conduct fundamental and enhanced commissioning on several LEED NC Gold certified projects. In addition to this, some other notable mentions. Jennifer is a professional engineer, a certified energy manager, a lead AP for the Building Design and Construction Rating System. She also serves on the City of Belmont Environmental Sustainability Board. Jennifer graduated from the University of North Carolina in Charlotte with a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering and has a Master of Science in Environmental Engineering from the University of Illinois. So, welcome, Jennifer, and thank you very much for presenting for us today. I am going to go ahead and pass control over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Sharon. All right, I'm going.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, great. So thank you for that introduction. So we'll get started here. I guess I wanted to start by saying that I know a lot of these sessions tend to be more heavily technical. This is certainly intended to be much more programmatic in nature. So I think, within JLL, we are the second biggest real estate company in the world, work with a lot of the Fortune 500 and Fortune 100 companies. So we're in a unique position to share some of our perspective, in particular within our energy services group, and how we work with a lot of our clients to help either start or supplement their energy and sustainability program. So some of the common threads that we see through a lot of these programs, first off, energy is not the sole driver for these programs. A lot of them are much more broad and address broader environmental sustainability issues. Next, and we'll dive into more detail on each of these topics. Next is, these programs are generally not, quick hits. These are long-term commitments. The clients really understand that, this is a process to really deliver a lot of the longer-term benefits. We're also seeing a lot of public commitments. So clients really setting those targets and then, doing what they say they're going to do. And also knowing to get there definitely requires some dedicated funding. So set aside energy project budget. Next, making sure you also have the right expertise to deliver those programs, so dedicated staffing with energy expertise. Next, making sure that this program is not standalone, but fully integrated throughout real estate and beyond the real estate group as well. Certainly requires buy-in from leadership. And then lastly, we'll talk about getting granular within the program. All right, so big picture, when a lot of these programs are first starting, it's hard to know really where to target efforts. So we see a lot of programs that, may just be kind of grabbing different initiatives to start just to say, that we're doing something and be able to check some boxes. But in a lot of cases, those kind of shift into a more strategic approach where you realize, we really need to understand, our organization and operations, where we can have the biggest impact, and, should we be focused more on, purely electricity versus a full energy program? What's the role of water, waste, or any of the materials that we're purchasing? So beyond, taking that holistic view, it's also important to really know where are you starting. So doing some type of a benchmarking and kind of, analysis against competitors to know, within some of these key areas, where are we now? And this could certainly help to have external perspective so that that you're truly getting an unbiased view of, what are our current, kind of initiatives and commitments within these different areas, and then where do we want to be? So this is really starting to lay out kind of the timeline and the strategies for these programs, knowing where you're going to focus, where you're currently standing, where you want to be, and how long you want to kind of set to get there. So of course, a lot of the initial drivers for the energy programs are still focused on cost savings. So that's, I think, always still has to be part of the discussion, but it can really kind of help drive some of the broader engagement, knowing that, initially you will be able to have hopefully some cost benefit and justification around cost savings. All right, so starting off the process, certainly important to make sure that you're getting a lot of the data in place. So I think a lot of real estate organizations are really trying to take a more data-driven approach to how they manage real estate in general, and that's no different for the energy management space. So really looking at, developing baselines and benchmarks within your portfolio, as well as, benchmarking externally, typically using Energy Star, can really help to start, kind of set goals and just make sure that you have all of the data you need to be able to track performance on an ongoing basis. So most of our clients are using some type of a dashboard or analytics program. This here is a screenshot from a JLL internal platform that we call our peers platform. So, this is just a great way to be able to visualize a lot of the utility data so that you're not reviewing manual spreadsheets and making sure you're seeing that your data is complete, but really having a better understanding of where you're using your energy the most, how that compares to prior year's consumption, how your sites compare to each other, and then also building in some normalization. So you're not just looking at how did this facility perform relative to the prior 12 months in total, but how much of that was attributable to some of the projects that we know were completed, or is based on weather changes at that specific location. And then also, how much of that is attributable to any issues with our data quality itself, which becomes increasingly important on larger real estate portfolios. So, being able to track, all of your energy consumption, demand, cost, breakout of fuels is really critical to being able to continue to drive success in these programs. And then, having that backbone of good quality data is, key to driving to your strategic plan. So next step in this process is generally being able to really take both a short-term and long-term view of what realistic goals are for the portfolio, which in a lot of cases means, having some sense of what opportunities are for energy savings, as well as just broader initiatives that are still on the table. So we like to kind of lay out a roadmap for a lot of our programs and set timelines for those, so that clients really understand realistically, how long some of these different processes can take. So, typically goal setting, we would say should take roughly 60 days if you're fully engaging all of the stakeholders that need to be involved in that process. The monitoring, reporting, and getting the data in place, as I mentioned, generally it's going to be another 60 days. And then setting those strategic plans, which includes some of that preliminary evaluation of initiatives, typically in the 30 to 90-day range. So I think setting proper expectations of some of those upfront kind of program setup items, I think is very important, and knowing that you're going to be able to hit the ground running and shift into the program execution phase after that. And then, of course, after implementing some of those initiatives is when it's critical to really start communicating those out, both internally and externally, to get recognition and just overall buy-in and expansion of those programs. So another critical piece of the process is making sure that you have the right vendor partners in place. So I think most of our energy managers realize very quickly that this is not something that you can successfully deliver a program by yourself. This requires not only working closely with a lot of the internal facility managers and project management staff, but also seeking external support from contractors and different energy management service providers. So, as different energy initiatives are identified, I think knowing who to reach out to, who has a track record of success and delivering that, can certainly help expedite the program and savings, and build some reputation for the program if you're delivering successfully up front. All right. Next is when you're looking at that roadmap, realizing that it doesn't end after that time frame, but really that's your chance to kind of drive continuous improvement. So you'll be kind of iterating on that strategic plan, and generally coming back on an annual basis to really lay out what your next goals and strategies are going to be going forward. So knowing that most of these programs are going to start with kind of building a foundation of some of those basics, but then hopefully expand to include some more complex strategies or projects. All right. Next, most of our programs and clients are making some type of a public commitment. So this could just be something as simple as setting goals that they're tracking in some type of an external corporate sustainability report. But we're seeing more and more clients really driving to some of these what are starting to be kind of industry-leading commitments around science-based targets, or RE100. So I think a huge benefit to some of these is that added accountability and pressure that can really help get attention to the program. Generally, these type of commitments are going to require some type of support from leadership. So it's generally the kind of exposure that these programs need internally to be able to help secure funding to be able to get the work done and really make some of the bigger strides in the program. Keep in mind this is not something that has to be considered day one. More of our clients may have programs that have been running for 5 to 10 years before they get to the point where they're making some of these more aggressive targets. But know that there are other options that are more achievable early on in a program, such as getting a certain number of sites ENERGY STAR certified, or just making those internal goals, but sharing that information publicly. So another tip here is to reach out to the marketing and PR team. Usually these are the kinds of things that they certainly want to kind of communicate outward, and can certainly help get some additional attention to the program. Just one example here I wanted to point out on how aggressive and obviously long-term a lot of these commitments are. So this chart here shows the RE100 companies, what their current electric demand is projected out to 2030, what their currently contracted renewable portion is in the purple and blue and yellow, and then where you see the kind of open squares or rectangles is that shortfall. So you can obviously see that these companies are not making commitments that they have very clear line of sight to how they're going to get there. This is something that is going to take a very concerted effort to be able to meet the RE100 or 100% renewable commitment by 2030. So that leads into project funding. So I know this certainly tends to be probably one of the biggest barriers to a lot of our clients and programs. I'm sure many of you on the call today would agree. But really a lot of the more advanced and leading edge programs, I would say, are that way because they have dedicated energy project budgets. So how do you go about trying to secure those funds? I would say the stronger business cases you can make that has very clear financial metrics that are targeted to the exact audience that you're trying to speak to and get that funding. So, I would say within our industry, simple payback still, tends to be the most common. I really encourage that if we need to look outside of that to speak to the right finance audience, then and lay out a more detailed life cycle cost analysis, then that's certainly worthwhile in a lot of cases. And also, I think another big thing that we can do within real estate is not just look at what are the energy savings financial benefits, but really trying to quantify a lot of the other potential operational improvements or extended life cycle, as well as just some of the benefits that aren't as quantifiable, but may provide improved resiliency or other benefits to the real estate portfolio. All right. I think also knowing that we have a very prioritized plan on know exactly where we're going to spend the money is critical to having the finance team really buy in and generally to get approvals. So some ideas just so that you know where to start in prioritizing the energy project budgeting. Conduct surveys. So I think a lot of the initial benchmarking can certainly highlight some outliers within the portfolio that warrant taking a deeper dive where you might do an energy audit or even go beyond that to more of a retro commissioning study. And a lot of cases, the EUIs for those sites can kind of help point you to where that might make sense, and then kind of pulling in the right expertise to review in more detail some of the control sequences preliminarily, just to see if they think it would make sense to do one of the more detailed retro commissioning programs. Certainly makes sense when you're trying to get funding for these to start with proven technologies. I mentioned having trusted vendors. but certainly wouldn't want to roll out an innovation or new technology on a broad basis without having conducted some pilots first, or being able to point to case studies for some of these technologies. And lastly, just making sure that you're incorporating as many available incentives in your projects as well. So it certainly shows that you're being thoughtful about how you're spending the funds requested, and that you're also seeking as much external funding for these programs as possible. All right. So having the right expertise, I would say at this point, almost all of the leading edge programs that we see have at least one dedicated headcount for an energy manager, if not in some cases their portfolio size and spend warrants a team of energy managers and analysts. But we see programs that try to start with someone who's in some type of a dual energy and operations role, and those just generally do not work. So I would say, just know from the beginning that to really gain traction, it requires having some dedicated staffing whose expertise is in energy, and that's their primary focus. So it will be the responsibility of that person to then coordinate with a lot of the other people within the real estate organization, and specifically a lot of what we call our energy champions, who tend to be a lot of the field technicians and chief engineers, operators at sites who really understand their facilities and know, how they're operating. They know what changes have been made, and generally they're the best people to train on what changes could or should be made to optimize how those facilities are operating. I mentioned that this dedicated energy manager resource, it definitely cannot get the job done alone. So having a network of other energy managers is a huge benefit to them. So within JLL, we do have over 200 energy and sustainability professionals globally, and any of our energy managers working on a specific client portfolio do have that full network of other energy manager expertise, which is divided into different centers of excellence for different topics that we know impact almost all of our client portfolios. So just having some of those shared resources to work back and forth with, to kind of troubleshoot and share best practices and knowledge across accounts is a huge benefit to a lot of these larger client programs. All right. So integrating energy throughout the organization, this may sound easy, but this is generally one of the more difficult tasks of a lot of these programs. So I tell a lot of our energy managers when they're coming on that, roughly half of our job is energy engineering, and the other half is really more kind of business and relationship management. So, in large corporations, a lot of what's needed to kind of get the job done within energy is really being able to navigate how some of these corporate organizations are structured and kind of work to build relationships in all the different departments that can have an impact on our program results. So facility management is kind of obvious that we need to have their support to help us not only identify opportunities for improvements, but then work to implement some of those changes. So a lot of getting things done is really built on just having, I would say, over communication with these people, making sure that you have their buy-in for any changes that we're making. Next, project managers. So of course, for some of the larger projects that are going to fall outside of the facility team, we will need project managers to help execute those projects. We also work very closely with a lot of our clients on helping set or enforce design standards for their capital projects. So having that relationship with the project managers to make sure that those standards are actually getting deployed and followed throughout the project. Next are supply chain and sourcing groups. So in a lot of cases, we're working very closely with them to make sure that we do have the right vendors needed to support the energy program. And they can also be critical in enforcing any kind of purchasing standards on equipment. And then if you're getting into a broader sustainability program, typically you'd be working even more closely with sourcing around some of the vendor contracts and building some of the sustainability requirements into those. And lastly here, I have the HR, as well as account management and leadership. So generally we've seen a lot of success in building accountability into actual individual performance ratings. So I know every corporation has kind of a different way they go about kind of judging performance for individuals, but this is a great way to get even more exposure and accountability for the energy program. So and then also a great way to recognize and reward individuals who are really exceeding expectations. Okay. So having support from as high up as you can go generally will contribute to successful programs. So I mentioned after we have some small wins or some projects that have been implemented, really making sure that we kind of get the message out and share case studies and communicate up to really show the value of the program and show as many tangible benefits as we can there. So I mentioned making sure that we're recognizing any of the major contributors and giving credit to those individuals and asking that leadership do the same. So this can certainly help to garner additional support of the program. So for instance, if you're really highlighting a project that one facility manager helped implement, there may be some kind of internal competition that comes from that, and you'll have more facility managers reaching out who really want to do something similar or participate. You can also seek external recognition for the program. This is especially important where C-suite wants to take some of those messages for potential public branding or PR benefits. And of course, those external recognition programs can help kind of grow the program to potentially secure additional funding resources to make sure you're hitting goals or to help set more aggressive goals. All right, and one of the last trends I have here is around getting granular. So this is really, I'd say the only one I have that's a little more technical. So I showed a screenshot from our peers platform, which is really meant to monitor monthly utility bills. But we see more and more programs that are really starting to kind of gather more detailed and more frequent data, looking at either interval data or sub-meter data, and especially looking at equipment monitoring as well. So I would say even if it's not deployed broadly, we have a lot of clients who are implementing fault detection and diagnostics platforms and pulling data from the building automation systems that can be monitored in real time or almost real time. So these can be great tools for the energy managers, especially on more mature programs, to really kind of squeeze out some additional savings. And in a lot of cases, these type of programs that provide the fault detection diagnostics are also a great facility management tool, and just making sure that not only is the energy for the building optimized, but the overall operations are as well. And this is just a screenshot here of some of the interval data where you can really, once you get data to this level of detail, you can really start uncovering items like changes in startup times, or when equipment should be shut down and it's not, that you generally cannot see in monthly utility data. So certainly encourage some more mature programs to start looking at this level of detail if you're not. Okay, and with that, I think we have plenty of time for Q&A.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions come in. The first one is, do you see an application for the science-based targets for a municipality? If not, what's a good target setting framework or standard to follow up for a municipality with its various operations?
Okay. Yeah, I could certainly see, even if it's not a, I guess, formal commitment to science-based targets, I could definitely see following that framework. So for those who may not be familiar, science-based targets is really meant to drive organizations to set a goal that will limit global CO2 emissions to a level that will keep us within a 2 C target. So in a lot of cases, there are fairly detailed methodologies for organizations on what that target should be for them. So I would say that there's a good bit of upfront work in just understanding what your impact is and what your targets should be. So I would say if you haven't looked into it in detail, it's certainly worth looking into. There's, at this point, I know over 400 companies who have committed to that. So I think it depends on where you are in your journey. If you haven't already been setting energy savings targets, then it is going to be aggressive for you. But if you've already had a program for let's say several years, then I definitely think it's you're probably at the point where it's worth investigating.
Okay, and this was a follow-up question from the same person. I think it's really just the same question. What's a good approach to develop facilities design standards?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. So as far as design standards, as far as construction standards, I know that the GSA has put out and made publicly available their standards, which do incorporate energy efficiency into them. So I can provide a link to some of those GSA construction standards that can certainly be used as a starting point. Beyond that, I think a lot of organizations will look at the current or most recent version of ASHRAE 90.1, and regardless of whether that's been adopted by the local agency, potentially looking to meet the latest standards there will generally provide a pretty significant improvement in efficiency beyond what may be locally adopted. But then on the other side, more on the operating standards, generally, our energy managers are going to work very closely with the controls technicians or the controls vendors to really understand how most of the facility control sequences are set up. And then it definitely benefits to do almost a gap analysis between that and a lot of the kind of energy conservation control sequences. So I would certainly recommend, I think there's two sides of that, having the design standards for new buildings, but then also having operating standards, and then working on kind of identifying those gaps and closing them over time to make those programming changes.
Okay, so if anybody else has any more questions, please go ahead and post them in the questions box at this time. There isn't anything else in there right now, but while I give you guys just a moment to look at that, I am going to take control back to my screen for a second, and would just like to remind you, if you are tuned in right now, you will receive an email in the coming days with a link to the recording for today's webinar and a link to your certificate of attendance. And for those of you that tuned in a little bit later, if you look in the handout section of your control panel for GoToWebinar, you will also notice that a copy of today's presentation is in there for you. If you would like to download that, please do so before we quit. And yep, we do have a couple more questions coming in. It says, what have you found to be the most effective way to obtain buy-in from ambivalent facility owners?
I think it definitely has to start with some of the financial discussions. I mean, as much as I hate to say it, I think that's always going to be our first foot in the door, is to be able to show the savings we can deliver. So I think obviously it's going to depend on the audience and knowing your client, who you're trying to go to for buy-in. I mentioned making sure you're kind of speaking in their language. So if you're going to finance, know what is important to them versus if you're going to the facility team. So really kind of tailoring your message. For instance, if you know that the facility team's biggest concern is reliability, then making sure you're speaking to how your energy project is going to improve the reliability, or potentially not impact their reliability.
Okay, a similar question here is how to convince the top management about the importance of the energy management program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think beyond the financials, I think looking potentially at what some of their competitors are doing can certainly help. So I think if that's something that's not on their radar, they're not aware that if you're falling behind, I think it's definitely worth bringing to their attention and kind of showing what some of these other corporations are doing, so that they know that if the longer you put this off, the more reactionary you are, and the more cost it's going to take to kind of catch up, versus if you're taking a more incremental approach. So I think coming with a concerted, or with having a very clear message on what you think the strategy should be, and how you stack up against the competition.
Okay, next question. Let me see. Someone would like to hear more about peers and IntelliCommand.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm happy to follow up on either of those offline, since both of those are technology platforms. I definitely feel like it's beneficial to kind of see those in real time as a demo. But yeah, in general, so Peers is the JLL platform that pulls utility data in. It pulls our clients' property data in and links those two. And then there's a large number of kind of standard reports built into the platform, along with a lot of different kind of dashboards and visualizations for that energy data. It also pulls weather data from the local weather station closest to that facility, and runs regression analysis. So there's these built-in weather models that kind of take out the impact of weather, so you can really compare your usage from one site to another, and for a single site over time. And then IntelliCommand is JLL's fault detection diagnostics platform. So anything beyond the monthly utility data is where IntelliCommand would step in. So they have built-in sub-meter analytics, interval meter data analytics, as well as they tie directly into the site's building automation system, and have pre-programmed algorithms that kind of run in real time to try to catch issues when they occur within the facility and send alerts. And then they also have engineers who work to develop custom algorithms when that solution is implemented for a specific site. So yeah, happy to, if you want to reach out directly, you can go into a lot more detail.
And in that follow-up email, I will include your follow-up email address. So if you do have further questions that we don't get to today, please feel free to reach out to Jennifer after that time. Let's have a quick look here. We have any specific techniques for buy-in of tenants who do not own the equipment?
Ooh, yeah, so the split incentive is definitely an issue. I would say that it's worth kind of chasing down who does see the benefit of that. So for instance, if you're in a lease and you don't have direct utility expense, but it's somehow passed through through your landlord billing, generally it's much harder to convince our clients who are in that situation to make upgrades where they don't see the benefit. So I think that's where it's requires more coordination directly with the landlord, or in a lot of cases within JLL, we'll work with our lease administration team to kind of modify lease language over time if there are ways for us to kind of take over direct management of the utilities. If there's metering in place, or if we can get sub-metering in place, that's generally the best way to make sure that whoever sees that direct benefit is the one responsible for making the upgrade.
Okay. Do you find ISO 50001 certification helpful as an energy management program?
Another good question. I would say helpful, yes. I think the program itself provides some good guidance. I think going through the certification process is very tedious and onerous, and we found that in a lot of cases requires a lot more effort on just kind of administrative work and documentation that may not provide as much value as having the people, instead of putting that together, putting more effort towards actually kind of finding savings or implementing projects. So I think that it's something that can provide value just from the kind of guidance and structure it provides, but I would say not always provide the most value to go through the full rigor of the certification.
Okay, and then we have one more question. It says, what is the best way to try and implement pilot systems? Most facilities are reluctant to try any relatively new or unproven technology in occupied spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. So I would say finding the right facility manager or chief engineer who may not be as reluctant to try new things. So someone who I think is potentially a little more tech savvy or just interested in trying new technologies. Generally, always going to be the best place to start. And agreed around occupied spaces or critical facilities and things. Obviously it depends on the technology, but in general, I think finding a site that's not as critical to the company's operations is always a good place to start with the pilots as well. Or if there's a way to do a really small scale test, and then kind of build those results from there.
Okay, I think that's it for the question. So thank you very much. Just going to move on quickly here. We have a couple of things I'd just like to mention to you. We do have our AEE World Energy Conference and Expo coming up in September in DC. We would love to see lots of you there. And our next AEE member webinar will take place on Thursday, the 20th of June. We have 3 guest speakers on that particular one. We will be the webinar will be hosted by Catherine Luton. She will host Leah Chiron and Victoria Simon as they discuss energy policy innovation and the impact that can have on carbon reduction. Both New York and Los Angeles have recently passed some different legislation, so they're going to examine the commonalities and key differences between those two and the potential impacts of such legislation. So I hope that many of you will tune in for that. You can find the registration link for that on our website. So thank you to all of our listeners today. We appreciate you tuning in for our AE member webinar of the day. And thank you, a huge thank you to you, Miss Jennifer Fortenberry, for your wonderful presentation today. We certainly appreciate your expertise and your time today to present to our members. So on that note, I think we are going to close. I do have a couple of final questions come in. Do you have time to go through those, or do we want to close and you can follow up after? I don't mind either way.
Yeah, I'm fine taking a few more.
Okay, then let's see here. Are there vendors who might have programs for discounted prototype trials of technologies?
Generally, I think that have to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. I would say most vendors are open to that if they know that there's potential for larger expansion from there. So certainly worth investigating. And I'm happy to talk offline as well if you have more specific kind of technologies or vendors you're looking at. Okay. Sharon, any last questions?
I'm sorry, I was muted. and I was reading it to you too. The response to the ISO 50001 question was very relevant and a common response. However, if the system is an administrative burden, then the system design and implementation has not been effective or optimal. I am hoping to share my approach later this year in a conference in South Africa. And I did, guys, a couple of you pointed out to me, I did give you the wrong date. If you look at the screen, that is actually today's date. That's today's member webinar date, not our next one. Our next one is actually Thursday, July 11th. So I apologize for my error on that one. But then another question right here. Are there any platforms where best practices for O&M for specific building types, spaces, equipment are shared?
I'm sorry, can you read that one again, Sharon?
Yes. Are there any platforms where best practices for O&M for specific building types or spaces or equipment are shared?
I mean, I would generally point to the Energy Star website. So there's a lot of good resources there. I guess without knowing more specifically exactly what you're looking for, that would be a great starting point. And then certainly reach out to me if you have more questions.
All right. Let me see. What is the difference between building management systems and energy management programs?
Ooh, okay. So yeah, generally when you see building automation system or building management system, that's the actual control system that's running the HVAC within that building. So my discussion around the energy management program is much more centered around kind of staffing and coordination of efforts by a central energy manager resource.
Okay. All right. I think just in response to one last question, which was really to me, it says, can you answer offline? But I think most of you that are still online will probably be interested to know this. It's asking about CEU or AEE credit. You receive a certificate of attendance that you can use towards your hours, towards your AEE renewals. We don't actually give CEUs for attendance at these events. And I think that was the final question. So once again, thank you to everyone, and particularly to you, Jennifer. We certainly do appreciate you today. So on that note, goodbye, everybody, and I hope to see you all next time.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.